It was down the hill from Kimber Farms. It was out there, and he also was, Edenville Nursery was there too. So my father bought a lot of supplies from Edenville Nursery, and also Roding's, nursery. He bought from both of them.
So how did you get to school?
I took the bus, and the bus picked all of us up, and they came by, and I had a choice of going to Centerville or going to Niles. And so I went to Niles on the bus, and there was Malcolm Dickerson, lived down Walnut Way, and he got on the bus, and I think that my mother and his mother thought that it would be nice to fix the two of us up. And he got on the bus one time, and he had a little snake around his waist, and he sat down, and all of a sudden this head of the snake popped out of his shirt. I couldn't move quick enough to get away from it. So when I came home, I told my mother what had happened, and she understood that this was not going to work. I said, he was the most awful person I had ever seen, wouldn't even want to be around him. And at the kitchen, since it was rural, I'd already had snake incidents. One time I stepped out of my door, not paying attention, and stepped on a snake at one time. They would just go for snakes. And my father didn't see any problem at all, because he would pick them up and they'd coil around his arm and stuff. And then when I was working in the pottery shop, I was behind the counter sitting on a stool, and I leaned my elbow back on the windowsill. There was a snake there just sunning himself. And so I fell off the stool, but didn't break anything.
Oh, gee.
So I didn't really, like those things at all. So that part of Niles, when it was very rural, nobody thought anything of those things.
About these snakes.
No, and they were very happy living there, because they used to have checks in the orchards to irrigate. And when they would irrigate, the gophers would all come out. So the snakes didn't really even have to work very hard. The gophers would be up there working out, and the snake could get them very easily.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I know that the biology teacher said something about, there was snakes in the biology class. And so he said, he could use some, food for the snakes. So I'm thinking, maybe I get extra credit for this, right? So I got my mother's jelly jar box. It had the little cardboard partitions in the jelly jar box. And I went out, and I'm not afraid of the gophers or the moles or anything, but so I put one in each of the jelly jar things.
How'd you?
Put the cover on it, and on the bus to bring it to my...
Were they alive or dead?
No, some of them were alive.
Oh, my goodness.
I didn't care whether they were alive. I just picked them up and put them in this box, and I put the lid on it. So, but on the bus, they started fighting because they had chewed the cardboard. So by the time I got to the biology class, I set it on the counter up there, and I told the teacher, I brought some food for this snake. And he goes, well, what did you bring? I said, well, moles and gophers. And he thought it was pretty nice because they were alive, and the snakes really liked them alive, right? But, I passed the class really well. Because at one time we had been in a little trouble because my friend Virginia and Shirley, we had set our watches, and we said, okay, at this time, we're going to drop a book. We were just being, not very nice. So we all dropped our book, and we created some kind of little scene, in the biology class. And we were punished for that. And one time, being punished, you had to go sit in the back room where they had all the things of formaldehyde, and you had to sit there being punished. So I remember sitting in that room, and I thought, well, maybe by bringing these things, I would redeem myself there. Because my parents, if I didn't get straight A's, I know that wouldn't work, right? I had to come home with an A. So I thought by bringing these live things for the snake, that would increase my grade. But I did do well in the class.
So how long did you live at the California Nursery?
We didn't live at the California
I mean,
Nursery.
excuse
We
me,
lived at International
I meant
Kitchen.
International Kitchen.
6 years.
6 years.
6 years.
So that was through high school.
High school.
So let's go back through high school then. Continue on, please.
Well, I went to high school, and you still feel more of a kindred spirit with the people from Niles when you start school. It's always nice because the kids came from all the different schools. So it was nice when you started high school, you sort of looked around and you saw people from Niles, and it made you sort of feel good. So I liked that part. And I think I was a pretty nerdy student, but I had friends, and since I lived by the railroad tracks from Niles, it was much easier to walk through the hobo camp, through a creek, to get to town. We come in by Shuckles that way, And in fact, I had a friend, her name was Thelma Freitas. And she came over, and we didn't tell our mother or anything, but we hung out we went through the hobo camp. We looked to see, how they were making their coffee and the different cans and things they had, but we weren't afraid.
So where was the hobo camp located?
It was on the other side of the railroad tracks by the
So,
creek.
so in International Kitchen, you were on the other side of the creek, so that's how you got to town, by
Yes,
going
yeah.
across the,
Or we walked across the railroad trestle. But I was already told that I couldn't walk across the railroad trestle, so I didn't like to do that too often because that would get you in trouble if you walked across the railroad trestle. But I was never told not to walk through the hobo camp.
and that was just on the other side of the trestle?
Yeah, the hobo camp is like in the creek bed. You walk through the hobo camp and around to get to town that way.
Okay.
And we weren't afraid of the people, of the hobos. And I think, in fact, our house was probably even marked because we used to have them come in. My mother would give them food every now and then. And the only time that she was really upset is when one slept in our car.
Oh, he slept in your car?
Yes.
Oh, okay,
So when we went out to get the car, there was one sleeping in the car. She was really mad about that.
right.
So she let him know. And he must have put the word out that, that's not a good thing. You're going to get rid of, you're not going to get any food if you sleep in the car, right? So, but we weren't afraid of them. And I think that it's different today when people come to your house. You tend to be more afraid of them. We didn't have any fear.
So how many would you say were staying there?
Oh, in the hobo camp?
Yes.
I think it would depend on what time of year it was. And remember, the railroad, they had the changes there, the railroad back, they had the change track where it could back up and, they changed trains and stuff there. And I think some of them didn't stay there that long. They were waiting to change, the track or something and go someplace else. I don't know.
Maybe 10 or 5 or?
Oh, probably 10 or so.
Uh-huh.
Maybe more sometimes. We didn't really count them,
Right.
We
Right.
didn't, we just,
Just went by them?
Just walked by, like neighbors,
Right.
But we didn't stop and talk to them. They, I'm sure, looked at us and we looked at them.
And that was on the way to town?
Yes, on the way to town. We would come in by Shuckles there. So, and otherwise you had to go all the way around to Mission Boulevard and then come back down, and it was a lot longer.
Right,
So it
right.
was much more efficient, coming to town through the hobo camp or across the railroad trestle.
So in high school, what about in your junior year?
In my junior year, we had this contest, and it was Miss Washington Township. And different people were talking about entering. And I knew that if I told my mother, that she would say, absolutely not, you're not going to do that. So I thought, yeah, I could enter, I'm not going to win, but it'd be fun to enter, and I knew, people were entering. So I signed up to go. So the night of the contest, it was at the auditorium at Washington High School. I borrowed my mother's long coat, and I wore my black working heels from being the hostess at the dining room. And I put on a two-piece bathing suit because I couldn't buy a new one because, you know, she would say, why are you buying a new bathing suit now? So I had a little two-piece bathing suit that I wore. And I showed up, and I ended up winning the contest. And when they called my name, you know, if somebody took a picture of me at that point, it would probably have a very weird expression on its face. But I won the first prize. Becky Leach came in second, or third. And then there was a girl from San Leandro that we didn't know. And they didn't have rules that said you couldn't be from San Leandro. So she entered and she came in second, I think, or third. Anyway, so when I talked to my friends after I won, they said, we didn't know you could walk so well. Well, the reason I could walk is I had my old working shoes on, and most of them all had bought brand new shoes that had straps on them, and they were having trouble even keeping them on. So I think that's why I won, is because I walked really well. And then they put on a banner that said Miss Washington Township, and they left the G up. Well, I didn't see that, but when I went home, back to the kitchen, I wanted to see Harry in the dining room and said, look what I've done, you know. So I showed him, and my mother was there too, and she goes, well, they could at least spelled it right. So they wrote Washington without a G instead of Washington. So, you know, that was sort of a big deal at the time. You know.
Sure, Miss Washington Township, that's
Yes,
pretty good.
yes. So, and then people from Niles were happy that a Niles girl won, you know, as opposed to somebody from Newark or somebody from Alvarado, you know, that somebody from Niles won. That was
Okay, so, no. So, so was this quite a large gathering, this pageant?
yeah, the auditorium was pretty full.
It was at Washington High School then?
Yes, yes.
And had they had these pageants before? I don't know anything about the...
Yes, every year. I don't know how when they started it. I know that the next year in 1956 was Miss Fremont.
Oh, so you were the Miss Washington Township for 1955?
Yes.
And then, of
yes.
course, they became a city in 1956.
Yes.
So what did you get for winning Miss Washington Township?
Well, they gave me a little scholarship. And then I was invited to do some of the fashion shows for some of the women's clubs and things. I did some fashion shows. I had to present trophies at the horse races. You know, when the horse would win, I would go out and present trophies and do things like that. And then Helen McIlvain's father used to do USO shows. And Helen was a dancer. So I used to appear with him, and he used to announce, you know, that I was Miss Washington Township. He actually upped it and said Miss Alameda County sometime. And I used to play the piano for Helen, and she'd dance, and sometimes just walk on the stage, and he would interview me. So I did some USO shows also.
Oh, interesting. That was a fun year, huh?
Up at Camp Parks,
Oh, okay.
which I think is a jail now. But before it was, you know, for Army.
Right.
In my senior year, I actually studied really hard, and I took my ACTs and SATs, and I was planning to go to school. And then I went to my parents' party that they had for my great uncle and aunt's anniversary, and I met my husband there
Where was that?
in San Jose.
Mm-hmm.
And he was dating my cousin. Well, they broke up, but it rained, so it was heavy rain, so he drove my parents home. And so I met him, and instead of going to school, I got married the following November of 1956.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents were not happy about that. So, first of all, he was Italian, and they thought that was pretty bad.
What was his name?
It was Anthony Speno.
Anthony Speno,
He
okay.
was an Italian Catholic. And they thought both of those points were a strike against him. But we've been married now for 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we have 3 children and 7 grandchildren.
Wow.
So basically it did work. And we had our own business for over 20 years. And we do property management now. And our son is working in that to continue.
So you left when you were you 18 at that time?
17.
17 when you got married. Oh,
My
so.
mother had to sign.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
So.
Well, great. And it sounds like you had a great life in San Jose and family and everything.
Yes, my hobby was traveling. I started traveling because my parents moved to San Jose near me. And
Oh, when did they move then?
they left Newark. They first moved to Saratoga. Then they moved from Saratoga down to Willow Glen where we lived. So I started traveling, and I visited every UN country now. So my goal was by the time I was 70 to finish all the UN countries, which I did at 69, but then they put in South Sudan was a new country, so I had to go back to South Sudan then to finish all my countries. So I have been traveling extensively.
So let's go back to the memories of Niles. Any other things that you wanted to mention? Or you actually have stayed in contact with Thelma and others.
Yes.
How did that happen? I mean, it's like,
I don't know, we just sort of talk to each other like we've never been away from each other. So Thelma gave my telephone number to my neighbor there next to the kitchen, Bumpy Tories, and she called me last week, and just out of the blue she goes, "Hello Marian, this is Bumpy." I knew immediately who it was, and I talked to her just like I was visiting her in her house. And we talked about old times. Her family was the one that had the first TV. We didn't have a TV. Her family had a TV. I think Mr. Torres owned a bar, was fairly successful, and they had a TV. And we used to go over in the afternoon, and before there was anything on, we would sit and watch the test pattern. And then one time that I was over there, her sister was called Bubbles, and Bubbles had a pair of barber shears, and she threw them in my back, probably because we weren't paying any attention to her. So I had to go home, and my mother checked to see if I had any lung damage or anything from having the barber shears in my back. So she put methylate on it, which you know, that always burned. So, but we talked to each other about, just like we hadn't, stopped talking to each other. And we talked about Elaine Souza. She lived around in the middle of the parking lot. The International Kitchen tried to buy their house, and they wouldn't sell. So they bought the house next to the Souzas, and the parking lot made a U shape around them. So the kitchen owned this, and the Souza house was right in the middle of the parking lot, sort of. And I remember Elaine Souza, her mother had a baby when we were seniors in high school. And Elaine used to have to walk the baby, and everybody was gossiping that it was her baby. And it was embarrassing for her, we always called, and her father was so proud. He gave out, I don't know how many cigars, that he was the proud father of his son, and he was older. So it was a joyous situation for the Souza family. For Elaine, it was a little difficult to begin with.
right. She was quite a bit older than her brother then,
Yeah, I
for
think
sure.
about 18 years old.
Right, right. Wow, so you had a lot of friends right around there also then, where you